Hello, everyone. Welcome back. We are pleased that so many are taking this opportunity to spend time in the Bible, and we're glad to be sharing it with you. All is well here in White House, Texas. We are meeting our reduced budget well enough, but we're still struggling a bit with the website. I don't think many of us realized until we had to do something about it how much content we have on that site. Not only that, but we have a lot of material that hasn't even made it up there ever yet. This would be Weekend Bible Study number 102, I believe. We have, 850 radio state programs or something close to that. And I have no idea how many sermons we have that have not even been mastered. I'm grateful to Doug Young for his work on cogsermons.org. We don't have many of the sermons that he has made available up there. And he's got, close to 300 of my old sermons. When you've been doing this for 50 years, there is some stuff back there, most of which has disappeared in the mists of time. I saw an item a few months back that bemoaned how much information is being lost, partly to deterioration of the original media, partly due to changes in technology. How many of you people still have an 8-track deck in your car? Tape duplicators have disappeared from the market, and tape players will be gone in a few years. In fact, I don't know if you can buy a new car with a cassette player in it any longer. But then some information deserves to be lost, so maybe the news is not all bad. On a sad note, I just learned this morning of the death of Tony Hubbard. Some of you know Rufus and Debbie King. Tony married Rufus' daughter, Tanya. He learned 10 months ago that he had brain cancer. He fought for his life, but his time came this morning. Our heart goes out to Tanya and the children, and to Debbie and to Rufus in this time. Well, that's our news for today. We have questions before Deuteronomy, so warm up your coffee and help yourself to that blueberry muffin you couldn't have last week. Someone wondered if I had found a recipe for an unleavened muffin. Well, I haven't, but Keir Graham sent me a picture of one from Zurich. I posted it on rondart.com under the Weekend Bible Study heading, and so for those of you who decided to pull my leg a little bit about the unleavened muffin, we got a picture of one, even though we don't have the recipe. We'll be right back. Phil Warren writes, at some point in the Bible, Christ becomes Jesus' last name instead of merely a description, the Christ. Could you talk about that? Well, actually, no. Christ does not become a surname. In fact, I don't know when surnames per se really came into common use. They were not in common use in the first century, and in fact still are not in places. If you've noticed, a lot of Arabs' first name is followed by the town they came from. This was the custom in England for a long time. I don't know exactly when it changed. Some ancestor of mine was named John of Dart. Dart being a small town just south of Wales in England. My ancestors were apparently Welsh. For example, Dart means oak, as in the tree, in Celtic. Over time, the preposition of Dart, John of Dart, became O, or John o' Dart, and then for most people it disappeared. There came a time, in an interesting sidelight, when British law required everyone to have a surname. You had to have it. So the Welsh people got a little ticked off with their government over that. So some of them rebelled, decided, we got to take a last name. So all of them took the last name Jones, which I suppose explains why Jones is such a common surname to this day. You might check it out. You may be Welsh. So Christ is not a surname. It's a title. Only in modern usage is it used as a name. It was not in the first century. Phil goes on to ask, now, if you were to see a sign that you felt would signal the start of the tribulation, where would you want to be geographically? I think I would just as soon be right here. I trust God to bring the best outcome for Allie and me, and we are not promised that we will be safe and secure all the way to the last days. We may have to die for his name's sake, so I'm just confident that he'll take care of that. I would not care at all to be in the Middle East, though. Best for us all that we be found doing what we're supposed to be doing until the angel takes us by the hand, as he did Lot and his family, and takes us off where we need to go, if indeed there is some place we need to be besides where we're at. So my answer is I'd just be right here doing what I'm doing. Michael Hutchison writes from Montana. I'd like to know your views regarding the Bible. There are so many versions and formats. I myself have a Holman's Supergiant print King James Version. Now, Michael said he wasn't blind, but the large print made a stronger impression on him, and he liked it. I use my King James Version as primary. I use the New International Version as secondary, and I consult the New Revised Standard Version and the NASB. And frankly, if I don't find what I'm looking by that time, I give it up. I find that there's all that I need in those. Now, if you're really desperate to find some more stuff, the NIV Study Bible is useful, and there are always commentaries you can go to. But frankly, Michael, I think you're about as well off with your Holman Supergiant print King James Version. It's there. If you're comfortable with King James, as many older people are, well, then just carry on. It's a good old Bible. Now, we have a study notes paper in inventory, I think, about the various versions of the Bible, their strengths and their weaknesses. I believe it's still in print. If it's not, somebody needs to let me know, and I'll put a version of it up on the web. Be sure and read the introduction to whatever Bible you've got to see what they tell you about their methodology. A lot of them are much easier to read. I found, for example, when the Living Bible first came out, if you just wanted to sit down in a chair somewhere with a cup of coffee and put your feet up and just read through the Bible, the Living Bible was awfully good. You should know this, though, about the Living Bible. It is not a translation, not a version. What it is a paraphrase. He goes a lot further than I do. I paraphrase the King James Version as I read it. But he takes the whole thing and very carefully paraphrases the whole Bible. I remember reading in Jeremiah, and his version of Jeremiah is just devastating. It's so well done. Well, anyway, there must be volumes of information about all these Bibles and versions on the internet. Just crank up your handy-dandy Bing or Google search engine and start asking about the different versions, and you will probably find more than you really want to know. Rich Masek writes from Cleveland, Ohio. So, you wanted us to grab a blueberry muffin during the Feast of Unleavened Bread. See there, it goes again. Anyway, I had a comment about Deuteronomy 19 and 21. It seems odd to me that these are not connected. Now, what he's talking about here is the case of the cities of refuge and then of the man whose body is found, and nobody knows who killed him or where he came from or perhaps even who he is. He says, it appears that if a man were to accidentally kill someone, he would understand he needed to get to a city of refuge without delay. Therefore, it's not at all surprising that the situation in Deuteronomy 21 would happen. In other words, a dead body would be found, and no one would know who killed him. It would seem logical that the first inquiry would be to contact the nearest city of refuge. That makes sense, I suppose. He goes on, perhaps if the person who accidentally killed someone was well established in his city and he would be missed, then that person would plead his case from the city of refuge and obtain his day in court. But I suppose someone who is passing through and not known may lay low in the city of refuge until an appropriate time had passed. Anyway, just wondering if you knew in Deuteronomy 21 why they didn't first make inquiry with the nearest city of refuge. Well, we don't know that they didn't. What we do know is that they had a system of law that means that nobody could be deprived of life or liberty without due process of law. The purpose of the elaborate procedure of measuring the distance to the different cities and having the elders of that city wash their hands over the place was to underline the fact you cannot just overlook a crime like this. A person has died. It would be unjust to just take the body out and bury it and do nothing to inquire. This has the incidental effect of establishing jurisdictions for dealing with some matter. the jurisdictions were controlled by the relative distance from one town to another to the point where the crime had taken place. And I can see how a person who accidentally killed a man might very well take off and go home and not go to the city of refuge because he would not want to be stuck in the city of refuge until the death of the high priest. So I think it's possible this kind of thing could happen in an accidental death. It could even happen in a deliberate murder. And, you can't cover in law every single possible variation on this. Keir Graham writes from Zurich. He said, well, about this blueberry muffin, he said, you must be referring to the lesser spotted flatbread blueberry muffin, which is very rare outside of Israel, but I bagged a shot of one recently in Switzerland and attached it. I put that picture up on my weekend Bible study site on rondart.com. Earlier in one of his emails, he mentioned that he had seen locust swarms and experienced them. He said, I experienced them while in southern Africa, Zambia, Zimbabwe, South Africa, and in different stages, too, from hoppers that get under your feet but you rarely squash, to swarms which seem to aim for the nose and the mouth. Interesting sounds they make as they rustle and munch their way through the vegetation. I have to confess, I'm not sorry to have missed that experience. Keir has been some strange places, it seems. His question, Deuteronomy 21, verse 14. The verse starts with and, which presumably means it follows on after the points of the previous verse, and then verse 14 ends with, because you have humbled her. Now, this is about, the fact that he's taken a wife from among the captives, a beautiful woman, took her home with him. She went through the ritual necessary, and she becomes his wife. He then finds no compatibility with her and sends her away. He asks, does the humbled bit refer to the woman having her hair shorn in a month's stayover? Chapter 22, which we'll come to, uses humbled to include taken, and yet verse 22, verse 19 says marriage is marriage, and that's that. Actually, the scripture doesn't elaborate. The NIV and the NRSV use the expression dishonored her. I think you have to basically take the word in its context because the description of what has actually happened. He takes her home, she shaves her head, compares her nails, sits in his house for a month, and then he can make her his wife. And then if he doesn't love her, can't work with her, whatever, something is wrong, and I think that's probably not that unusual, he had to let her go. He couldn't sell her to somebody else, like a captive or a slave. Anyway, as I pointed out, it is a matter of protecting the woman within the social structure of the time. Okay, that's the questions. Take a quick break if you like and come right back. Open your notes and Bible to Deuteronomy 22, and we'll go on. It's interesting as we work our way through the book of Deuteronomy to notice the difference between what amount to moral exhortations and administrative functions of law for a society. A great deal of what we read here affects the sociology of Israel, the way that the community would live together. Some of it has to do with the things that affect you only, but there are other things that have to do with your relationship with others in the community. Deuteronomy 22 starts out this way. He says, "You shall not see your brother's ox or his sheep go astray, and hide yourself from them." I think what he means by hide yourself from them, I think he means you pretend you don't see them. "You shall in any case bring them again to your brother." Well, you're expected to lasso this thing and take it home. If your brother isn't close, or even if you don't know who he is, you bring it to your own house, and it shall be with you until your brother comes looking for it, and when he does, you shall restore it to him again. "In like manner you shall do with his ass, so also with his clothing, with any lost thing of your brother's which he has lost, and you have found it, you shall do likewise. You may not hide yourself," that is, you may not ignore it or pretend you didn't see it. Now, this is no trivial matter. It establishes the idea of private property at every possible level. You are not permitted to play finders keepers, even if you are poor and your neighbor is well off. That is not your judgment to make. It doesn't make any difference how little you have or how much your neighbor has. If you find his ox, it is your obligation to take it back to him. The law of Moses is very, very strong on helping the poor. It is a fundamental value of the Bible from the Testaments Old and New. However, it is on the voluntary helping of the poor, not the emphasis on the poor helping himself to what doesn't belong to him, what someone else has worked for, what someone else has sacrificed for. And of course, if you have a society in which everyone respects everybody else's property, you're going to have a much better relationship between neighbors and between people. The rich will be more motivated to help the poor, and in fact, you probably will have fewer poor people in the land. Verse 4 includes another principle. You shall not see your brother's ass or his ox fall down by the way and pretend you don't see it. You shall surely help him lift them up again. Yeah, here's your neighbor over here. His animal's down. He's kind of got his foot in something, can't get up. You're not supposed to just keep on walking away from this. You're supposed to stop and go back and help him with his animal. To hide yourself is to pretend you didn't see it. NIV says you can't ignore it. Now, this sense of responsibility for helping one another extends in so many directions it's almost uncanny. And what it's telling us and giving us is a fundamental set of values for a community. Now, you may want to argue that any kind of administration of these laws is passed away. I don't know how true that is. At least this same administration that was true then is not true now, but that doesn't mean we don't administer them in any degree now. But living in a world where the government pays no mind to it, it's up to you to do these things. But the principle, the underlying meaning of the law is you live in a community, you respect your neighbor, you help your neighbor, you respect his animals, you respect his property, and you always take it back to him. Verse 5 goes into a really interesting illustration. This whole section here is all kind of related. The woman shall not wear that which pertains to a man, neither shall a man put on a woman's garment, for all that do so are abomination to the Lord your God. Now, this particular law has some far-reaching implications and a lot of misunderstandings. In fact, it drives the literalist, the legalist, just a little bit nutty. I heard the story, I've told it before, forgive me, of a church down somewhere in Florida, I think, where the church was planning a skating party. Well, now you know that when you go skating, sometimes people fall down, especially people that don't skate very often. Well, the deacons were a little concerned about women. You know, women should wear skirts. They shouldn't wear pants, and they, generally speaking, forbade women to wear pants. But the problem was, if they're going to wear skirts out there skating, they might show a flash of thigh and cause some man there to think unworthy thoughts. So they thought it over and talked it over. They finally reached a decision. They allowed the women to wear slacks to the skating party, but they had to wear a skirt over these slacks. Okay, well, frankly, it all gets a little bit ridiculous. The striking thing about this, you know, if you're going to take the legalist approach, you have to start making rules about what people can and cannot wear. What you need to ask is, what's the point of this law? Well, obviously, it's gender identity. God doesn't really care much for the idea of gender neutrality. Have you noticed that? He wants men to be men, women to be women, and they have different duties and different responsibilities. And women bear children, men don't. There are just a lot of differences there that God wants taken into consideration. I think the Scripture is talking about cross-dressing. Okay. Now here's the next question. What is it about slacks that only pertains to a man and doesn't pertain to a woman? The Bible never defines that. And if you think about this for a moment, you'll suddenly come to the realization, maybe not so suddenly, that it is society that determines what a man's garment and a woman's garment is. And society having determined that, we're to respect it. We are to dress like a man if we're a male, and we're to dress like a woman if we're a woman, and let's not confuse the identities with people. If a bird's nest chanced to be before you in the way, any tree, on the ground, whether there be young ones or eggs, and the dam sitting upon the young or on the eggs. Here's your situation. You shall not take the dam with the young. You shall in any wise let the dam go, the mama, and take the young to you, that it may be well with you, and that you may prolong your days. Now, what's this? Environmentalism? No, it's conservation, not environmentalism, if you understand what I'm saying. Conservation means the preservation of nature around you, saving stuff. Don't blow through stuff. Environmentalism actually exalts the environment almost to the place of God. You look at the purpose of the law to understand it, okay? What is the purpose of this law? Is it to protect the environment of the bird? For example, is it the big spotted owl thing out on the West Coast where they were stopping people from taking down trees because they would destroy the environment of the spotted owl? I have a feeling the spotted owl would have did whatever it had to do to go somewhere else for an environment, but nevertheless, never mind. What's our point? The point is right there in verse 7. The purpose is that you may prolong your days. This is just another way of saying, folks, this law of conservation is not for the sake of the bird. It's not for the sake of the planet. It's not for the sake of the environment. It is for your sake. And that's what we got to get through our heads when we go through some of these things. Some of the stuff that's happening nowadays is kind of crazy, and you'd get the impression that people are trying to preserve the planet, which frankly, the planet's going to do whatever the planet's going to do regardless of us. But nevertheless, save the planet and sacrifice people to save the planet. Sorry, the Bible doesn't recognize that. Then in verse 8, now remember what we're doing here are things that have to do with our relationships in the community. We're structuring a society. We are setting values that affect the way other people live and the quality of other people's lives. Verse 8, when you build a new house, you shall make a battlement for your roof, that you bring not blood upon your house if any man fall from there. Now that's a fascinating little item. I built the house we're living in. It's been 26 years ago now, I think, and it's a fairly steep pitched roof. I did not put a battlement on the roof. Did I break the law? Well, you have to understand that the law was given in a time and a circumstance where people didn't do pitched roofs. They actually had flat roofs that they sometimes slept on in hot weather. People went up there. They lived on their roof as well as in the house. I've got a deck out behind my house. A person in this day would have his deck on the roof. Plain and simple. They would have staircase in. They would go up there, and once it started getting cool in the evening, it was a good place to go up and spend the night and sleep there. Now, you are told, put a battlement around that roof. Why? So somebody doesn't fall off and get hurt. If they do, they're going to bring blood on your house. And that bringing blood upon anything in God's estimation is very, very bad. So my house, I did not put a battlement on the roof. And anybody who's going to be working on that roof, I expect to have insurance and take his own precautions. But I did put a battlement around my deck, which is some 8 feet on there above the surrounding ground beyond it. And somebody falls off that, they are going to be hurt. So the law calls for a battlement. Frankly, so does common sense. But sometimes people don't show common sense, and thus it's in the law. If you create a hazard, you have got to protect people who come to your property from being hurt by the hazard you have created. How's that? Now, the next item is curious, to say the least. You shall not sow your vineyard with divers seeds, lest the fruit of your seed you have sown and the fruit of your vineyard be defiled. Now, I'm sorry, I am just not enough of an Aggie to know what's going on here. But it seems to be part of a broader principle, because we have here, I think, three particular illustrations of a given principle that I think that God is driving at here, and he's using illustrations from agriculture to show it. Okay? The next thing he says is, you shall not plow with an ox and an ass together. I've told a story of the time when we were walking across campus in Brickett Wood one day, and my friend Charles Hunting and I, we saw a young boy and a woman and a girl walking along who were seeing each other. I think that's the term for it. They had been dating. And I watched them as they walked across campus, and I said, Charles, I don't know why I think this way, but I just don't think that's going to work. And Charles says, I can tell you why it's not going to work. I said, why? He said, because you shall not plow with an ox and an ass together. Now, it was really funny, because the girl she wasn't an ox, but she was rather large, and the boy had something of a reputation of an ass, and so both of us had a good laugh about that, and they never knew, of course. But it is fascinating to me, because what Charles did was actually go straight to the point of this scripture. If you stop and think about it for a moment, I remember having a discussion with some Aggies about this once upon a time, and they were starting to think, the legalists who were, well, why couldn't you plow with an ox and an ass together? One hypothesized, well, they each have their own kind of manure they put out, and maybe there's a difference in the quality, the acidity, or something in the manure. Frankly, I think there was an awful lot of manure in his explanation when you get right down to it. There was nothing. But if you think for a moment, you should know this. Have you ever seen an ox yoke? Have you ever seen the harness for using an ass for plowing or carrying? How on earth could you ever yoke an ox and an ass together? I would say the chances are pretty good, unless somebody just wanted to be stubborn about something, that no one in the history of the planet has ever tried to plow with an ox and an ass together. Got it? Oh. Well, if no one would ever do it, why did he have to give them a law? Think about it, folks. How many axioms, how many sayings do we have in our lifetime of things that have very little to do with anything anybody would really do on purpose, and yet they carry meaning? They are aphorisms. They are little country illustrations that drive home a point, that say to us there are differences between creatures that are too great to work with them together. What do you get from that? Here's what I get, and it's as clear as crystal to me. There are differences between people that will make it very, very difficult for them to make any kind of relationship, be it marriage, be it business, you name it, to make it work. Just pay attention to your differences. And one of the things that's driving us crazy in our society nowadays is that all this diversity that's around us and diversity understanding, and we don't handle it very well at all. But this basically says just recognize that there are some differences that are too great to bridge. And it's in that same vein that the next verse, you shall not wear a garment with diverse sorts as of woolen and linen together. I knew a chap back in college who was a bit of a legalist, and he had removed all of the elastic from the ankle of his socks. And so he wandered around campus all the time with his socks down around the top of his shoes. This is not what this law is really about. What this law is about is that there are some things that just don't go together. Don't try to put them together. And there's no indication that there were any ox and ass police around there checking you out, driving by your place and saying, he's plowing with an ox and an ass, arrest that man. No, these are instruction to us to consider differences and don't try to ignore them, because sooner or later it's going to jump up and bite you. Why do you do all this stuff? So you can prolong your days and have a better life. That's what it's for. Now, verse 12 is kind of curious. He says, you shall make you fringes upon the four quarters of your vesture, wherewith you cover yourself. Why would we do that? I think the meaning of this is mostly lost. although they were apparently used as some kind of generalized identification. People were still wearing these kind of tassels in first century Judea, and one wonders if that's how the people in the second chapter of Acts knew that the disciples were Galileans. Some have wondered, I did myself, if it's their speech, their accent, it might have been. But at the same time, it may be that people from Galilee wore a particular kind of tassel, and the people of Judea wore one that's a little different, and they recognized it. Elsewhere, the law specifies a particular color of tassel, and I've got an article floating around somewhere on that subject that basically it was a kind of rank identification. You remember the instance where Saul, who was chasing David from one hill to another out in the desert, came to a cave. The time came he wanted to relieve himself. So he went into the cave, and the King James Version uses the expression to cover his feet, which is, if you ever want to get a chuckle, read Clark's commentary on that particular section. But anyway, he goes in there to relieve himself. David happens to be hiding in that cave, and he's back in the quiet in the corner. One of his soldiers there sees it happening. He kind of gestures to David, this is your chance, get this man. David won't do it. But what he does do, he takes his knife, probably very sharp, reaches down and cuts off the hem of Saul's robe. Now, by itself, that still seems a little puzzling until you come to understand that what he probably cut off was this tassel, which was a sign of Saul's rank and identity. And after Saul went out of the cave, David followed him out of it and called to him and showed him, you see, I could have killed you. I didn't do it. So this particular item, I see people once in a while who are, you'll catch it if you pay attention. You'll notice they have this little blue tassel somewhere hanging up under a jacket. And they're trying to follow this particular law. And it's okay, but I don't think it's anything that really means anything in our generation, and therefore there's not much reason for us to do it. Verse 13, if any man takes a wife and go in unto her and hate her, doesn't like this woman at all, and that kind of thing happens. Some of us guys want to marry the wrong woman, and some women marry the wrong guy, and back in that time, women didn't have nearly the choice of who they married that women today do. But he give occasions of speech against this woman, brings up an evil name upon her, and says, I took this woman, and when I came to her, I found she was not a virgin. Now, there are some huge societal issues involved in this, issues which fall so far out of our worldview that we only understand them in part. For one thing, the fact that a woman is a virgin when she married in that time was crucial. It was crucial for a couple of reasons. One is God's law made provision that it was one man and one woman, or one man and his wives, for life. And they were not to have sexual relationships with anyone outside of that union. Now, what's one effect you can think of that would follow from a society that followed that rule? Well, in one generation, there would be no more sexually transmitted diseases in that society. So, now there's one other consideration. This was not a world in which a woman whose husband tossed her out on the street could go get a job. She couldn't go down to the employment agency, go down to the temporary agency, and begin to go out and do typing jobs or sorting jobs or get involved in sales or whatever it may be. A woman's survival depended upon her man, be it her father, be it a brother, be it her husband who has taken her into his house. And so steps had to be taken to protect women from predatory males and the arbitrary nature of what some men will do to women. Okay, when this happens, the father of the damsel and her mother will take and bring forth the tokens of the damsel's virginity to the elders of the city in the gate. And it's an interesting scene in The Hajj, a novel written by Leon Uris about Middle East and Middle East society, that even in the time that he was writing about, Arab families would follow this practice. They would put a sheet, a cloth, under a girl on her wedding night. They didn't do it, but this was to be done. And upon the breaking of the hymen, the woman would bleed somewhat, and so therefore the evidence of her broken hymen would be right there on this cloth. That's what he's talking about right here. And so it was a societal custom. So if he claims she was no virgin when I married her, they come to the elders and they hold up this and they say, no, sir, she was a virgin, and here's the proof of it. The father shall say, I gave my daughter to this man to be a wife. He hated her. And lo, he has given occasions of speech against her, saying, I did not find your daughter a maid. And yet these are the tokens of my daughter's virginity. They spread the cloth out before the elders. I don't know. I'd hate to be an elder in that environment. That's something it's strange to me. What happens? Well, the elders of that city shall take that man and chastise him. There's a provision somewhere that if a man is to be beaten for something, you're to lay him down on the ground and whip him with 39 stripes. 40 stripes was the maximum. The Jewish custom was to cut it back by one to be sure they didn't miscount. Then they shall fine him 100 shekels of silver and give him to the father of the damsel, because he has brought an evil name upon a virgin of Israel, and she shall be his wife. He may not put her away all his days. Now, this differs from some of the other laws of divorce and remarriage in this period of time. But there is a particular situation where, because this woman has been, quote, defiled or humbled, in other words, she is no longer a virgin and therefore no longer eligible to be some other man's wife in this society. Well, that takes place. She's helpless. She could starve to death. So, consequently, this man is responsible for her his entire life and hers. On the other hand, if this thing is true, and the tokens of virginity be not found for the damsel, they shall bring out the damsel to the door of her father's house, and the men of her city shall stone her with stones that she die, because she has wrought folly in Israel to play the whore in her father's house. So shall you put away evil from among you. What's the purpose of the law? Well, it is deterrence in simplest possible terms. What social effects do you think this policy would have had in that world? Well, one obvious effect I've already mentioned is the absence of sexually transmitted diseases. They are gone in a generation. There would be no children being born blind because of gonococcus bacteria in the birth canal, would there? Like many laws in Israel, which I think some people have a problem with because they don't understand the surrounding society, these laws protected women and they protected children. That's what they were for. If a man be found lying with a woman married to a husband, they shall both of them die, both the man that lay with the woman and the woman. So shall you put away evil from Israel. Which calls to mind the incident where they brought a woman to Jesus who had been taken in adultery. Where was the man? I don't know how many sermons I've heard about this over the years, and almost every preacher that brings this up says, where was the man? But see, you've got to do it with both of them. Jesus answered, let him as without sin first cast a stone at her. I almost wonder if the man was there, but nevertheless, they said they caught her in the act, but they didn't bring the man. If a damsel that is a virgin be betrothed to a husband, and a man finds her in the city and lies with her, you bring them both out of the gate of that city, you shall stone them with stones that they die. The damsel, because she didn't cry out in the city, and the man, because he has humbled his neighbor's wife. So here we begin to see what he means by humbling his neighbor's wife. So shall you put away evil from among you. What's the purpose of the law? Okay? We keep coming back to this. What's the point? What's the meaning? What's the design? Here it is. It is to deter evil and wrong behavior among your people and to create a moral society. And because human beings are like they are, sometimes you have got to be pretty strict in your penalties if you're going to be successful at this. Well, here's another case. A man finds a betrothed damsel in the field, and he forces her and lies with her. Then the man only that lay with her shall die. To the damsel you shall do nothing. There is in the damsel no sin worthy of death, for as when a man rises against his neighbor and slays him, it's the same in this matter. He found her in the field, the betrothed damsel cried, and there was no one to save her. On the other hand, if a man find a damsel that is a virgin not betrothed, lay hold on her and lie with her, and they be found. The man that lay with her shall give to the damsel's father 50 shekels of silver. I think that's quite a bit. And she shall be his wife. Because he has humbled her, he may not put her away all his days. You know, it's interesting. I recall growing up in northwest Arkansas, back in the Ozarks, in the good old days, it was a fundamental value that if a man had sex with a girl, he had to marry her. You've heard of the shotgun wedding? Frankly, it comes from this law right here. And it was really a value that was practiced by the people back there. There was one joke or two I heard about it. For example, my uncle used to say that he was out hunting in the woods one day and he saw my aunt taking a bath and she was naked. And he thought because he saw her naked, he had to marry her. So he did. This was tolerated in the family. I think his wife found ways to get even with him. But it just illustrates again, though, the presumption of responsibility in a social structure like that for preserving the honor of women. You may not have initially thought of these laws as protective of women, but if you lived in those days, you would certainly have seen them that way. And it ends with verse 30, a man shall not take his father's wife, nor discover his father's skirt, which is simply another way of talking about dishonoring his father and his father's wife. This is, I guess, the sort of thing that Paul is talking about in his first letter to the Corinthians, where a man had done precisely this, not necessarily his mother, but his father's wife, because it's a fair chance that his father may have had 4 or 5 wives, and he was simply not allowed to have sex with any of them. It was a dishonoring of his dad. Now, as I pointed out before, I'll just underline, some of the administrative laws can no longer be applied. They have passed from common use. But the underlying principle, the underlying law, has not. And any society that will, in principle, try to apply these things is going to be a whole lot better place to live than one that does not. Give that some thought. Send me your questions to ron@borntowin.net, and we will talk again next week.